There is a secret about chess. It has not always been as entertaining as it is today. Longer games, less interesting mechanics, and more chaos were more popular when it was created. More jumps and less long-range pieces. Different win conditions, even the playing field have varied through time. Stay with me and watch the evolution of chess from a game design perspective, a story about how players crafted one of the best strategy games of all time for centuries. It all started with Chaturanga, an ancient Indian game. Same pieces as today's chess with different names and movement rules. Same board with some markings whose purpose is still unknown. The win condition is to checkmate the king or reduce the opponent's army to just the king. The king moves like modern chess but can't castle. The queen has one step in any diagonal. The rook moves like modern chess, horizontally or vertically, through unoccupied squares. The knight moves the same as in chess, jumping above other pieces in an L shape. The pawn moves one step forward and captures diagonally, but has no double step on the first move. Bishops vary their moveset depending on the source. 2 squares diagonally, jumping over pieces, 1 step forward, or 1 step diagonally, and 2 squares orthogonally, jumping over pieces like some sort of jumping rook. The starting position was similar to modern chess, but the king and queen did not face the opponent equivalent. 200 years after this board game, Shatranj appeared, similar in appearance but with some minor changes. The king, queen, rook and knight remain unchanged. Promotion was introduced. If a pawn reaches the last rank, they transform into queens. Bishops kept one of their past variations, moving 2 squares diagonally, jumping over the square in between. Now the starting position has both kings facing each other, but their exact position was not fixed, so there were 2 possible starts. With the expansion of chess around the world, there were multiple attempts to make the early game faster. Pawns moving 2 squares in its first move, en passant capture that allows a special capture against a pawn that has double stepped. The king could also jump once in the early game. This change led to castling. The queen could also jump once, 2 squares to a same colored square. Even pawns started on the 3rd rank for some time. Hundreds of years passed until the queen and bishop received a significant upgrade. With increased range, these pieces became stronger, making checkmates easier and games faster. During all these changes, emerging mechanics appeared. Multiple of them were so interesting that changed the rules of the game to make them more frequent. 2 of these emergent mechanics appeared because of the unlimited range the rook has since its origin. Given that its movement can be stopped if a piece is in its trajectory, there are 2 possible outcomes, depending on the team of the blocking piece. When the rook and the piece blocking it are from different teams, a pin can happen if there is another piece behind the blocking one. If the blocker moves, the file opens, threatening a piece without spending a turn. When the rook and the piece blocking it are from the same team, a discovered attack can happen if there is another piece behind the blocking one. When the blocker moves, a piece is threatened without the attacking piece spending a turn. I think pins and discovered attacks being so interesting drive the design towards a long-range battle. With bishops and queens having unlimited movement through unoccupied space, these 2 mechanics became more frequent. Another emergent mechanic present from the start was forking. Similar to the tool with the same name, the multi-directional movement of some pieces allows them to threaten a capture in multiple directions. If more than one piece is threatened, the opponent won't be able to move away all the affected pieces in one turn. Forks were what led the initial design. When range was more limited, forks were the most common trap one should be aware of in the early stages of the game. Also, I think the variations that added jumping to multiple pieces were attempts to double down on the same idea. The problem it probably created was slowness. In modern chess, forks are usually slower tactics to prepare, made by slower pieces. Also, forks are possible with all the pieces, so there was no real need to add so many jumps. Another powerful concept that emerged early but was not taken into account until bishops got their power up was chaining pawns. A pawn only marches forward. Every step not only has a time cost, but also an opportunity cost, because any error won't be fixed by going back. The most obvious way to advance is using a pawn behind, covering the back. This has two consequences. First, the weakest pawn in the chain is usually well protected and out of reach. And second, if a pawn chain is broken, an additional weakness is created. This mechanic affects directly the pacing of the game, and with long-range diagonals being locked or protected, bishops and queens are restrained until some chains are broken. The last thing to cover is sacrifices and trades. Trades are captures that are sequentially executed by both sides. If a trade is negative in value and it's forced or allowed by the losing side, it's considered a sacrifice. Captures change the state of the board not only because of the captured piece, but also because the attacker changed its position. Sacrifices born from the realization that a numerical advantage can be exchanged for a positional advantage. This is another mechanic that benefited from longer ranges and faster gameplay. If pieces need only one turn to cross the board to deliver checkmate, a displacement of a piece has a major impact. It is a great tool for open access to the king's shelter or filling his escape routes with his own troops. Seeing this evolution, it's obvious that the design of the game centered around complexity and speed. The fact that clocks were introduced later in the competitive scene is another confirmation of this. Chess manages complexity in a beautiful way. As studies have shown, humans have a short-term memory that can handle up to 7 items with minor variations from person to person. The board is 8 by 8. We have 6 types of pieces and less than 7 mechanics to use as tools while developing our strategy. The complexity of the game is slightly above manageable to be a challenge, but still feasible with enough time to think. Given that the best part of the game is navigating the chaos of complexity that it is generated after the initial moves, making the early game faster was a desire of the players for hundreds of years. Chess design is a lesson about pacing and listening to players' interests. Everyone was enjoying the middle game and endgame because of the complexity it had. On the other hand, early game was so easy that openings were developed so they could be executed from memory, entering the middle game as fast as possible. Also, identifying which mechanics affect which phase of the game is important. Slower pieces, pawn chains, and forks lead the early game. Chain breaks, faster pieces, pins, and discovered attacks develop the middle game. And finally, sacrifices, promotions, and trades decide the endgame. This pacing also complements complexity, as in every moment we have less than 7 things to think about. Chess is a game about managing space and complexity, trying to overwhelm the opponent, creating new threats to think about, while asphyxiating the space at their disposal. That's why the game evolved into a faster one, to reach this kind of situation quicker. We can learn a lot by analyzing classic games. Which game would you like to see dissected? Is there any emergent mechanic that you love? Tell me in the comments, and I'll see you here in the blink of an eye.